Hey everybody, I'm Lori Rudiman and welcome to the Rise of HXM, Human Experience Management. I'm here as always with my awesome co-hosts Minda Hartz and Laura Schmidt, and we have a special guest today, Katie Augsburger. Katie, how you doing?
Hi, I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, we're super thrilled to have you here now. Just to level set, the show is seen globally. Where are you coming in from today?
Currently sunny Portland, Oregon.
Very, very nice. Portland, the hotbed of all sorts of things in the world right
Yes,
now, right?
yes. But we were usually when you're mentioned on TV, it's a great thing, but in the middle of the debates wasn't as exciting for us.
Yeah,
So.
no. But it's actually perfect because some of the issues that are happening in
Mhm.
Portland are really universal and important for the framework that we're discussing today, because today is all about diversity, inclusion, and technology. So I'd
Mhm.
love to start out with you and give you our first question, which is really, can you talk to us about the difference between diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, absolutely. So diversity is just what exists in the world. It's the ecosystems, communities, it's just what is. When we're talking about diversity at work, what I think we're actually trying to talk about is removing the barriers to diversity that are either implicit or explicitly placed that prevent workplaces from actually looking like our communities. And inclusion is when we have a diverse workforce that is treated equitably, meaning the outcomes and successes that people have aren't predicated by how they look, what identities, what skin they're in. So you can't really have true inclusion without equity and diversity. Together, that is what inclusion is. It's a sense of belonging inside of work.
It's really good, really concise. I think a lot of people bring their own framework to the definitions of diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging. Do you find that people really struggle with those definitions? Because I've seen a wide panoply of explanations. And if you do, why
Yeah,
is that?
there's like a word soup that we have, and like sometimes we use those words as like a signal of like who's in, who's out. Do I say EDI? Do I say DEI? Do I say diversity inclusion? And really what we're trying to get at is these each of these words have meaning and they have information for us, but what we're trying to achieve is inclusion
Yeah.
through diversity, create an equitable space, and when we do that together, we have inclusion.
I love that. That's really well said. Well, Minda, I know this is something that's a real passion for you, this discussion. And I wonder how companies can get a true understanding of how employees are feeling, how they're doing around diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging. So, Minda, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that it's important to, this is where I really think that technology can be a game changer in terms of our communication and, what's a good experience for the population versus where there might be ways to enhance. And so, for example, if I'm working at a company where the powers that be tend to be, all white men, and they say diversity matters, all those things. And as the, only Black woman in the room, I'm like, does it really? I'm questioning that. And on top of that, I may feel as though I don't have room to communicate that. And I think that's where HXM helps, because that can be embedded inside of the communication tools, right? How am I experiencing the workplace right now, especially at this racially I can't even get it out, this racially sensitive time period.
Yeah.
And I may not have the space to be able to say that, or the agency, but with technology, I could, those are the questions that leadership could pose to me, right? What does good look like? And it really allows me to say, okay, maybe I can be honest. And I think so it's so important for us to have diversity, because what I may be experiencing right now may be different from what someone else might be experiencing it right now in the workplace. And I think both perspectives are important, but we won't get to that if we don't have those tools for feedback to be able to address the data points that we need to.
Really well said. Lars, I'm thinking about the promise of technology, especially around employee sentiment just in general. And yet I'm thinking back a couple of months ago where HR and DEI professionals woke up and suddenly realized, oh, work is still racist, right? So what's the promise of technology with employee sentiment, and what's the what's the downfall of it?
I think I'll start with the downside. The downside is any company or practitioner that thinks technology is going to solve their diversity problems and challenges. The technology, like everything else, technology is a tool that can support programs and intent and enhance them and augment them, and in some cases streamline them and make them better. But it doesn't absolve you from doing the actual work of looking at your systems and your processes and the outcomes. And I think that's really important. I think you talk about sentiment analysis. There are some tools now on the HXM side that actually allow you to capture feedback in ways that traditionally we hadn't. So lots of companies are doing town halls, they're doing virtual town halls, they're having regular communication cadences. There's tools that allow you to actually track sentiment and kind of employee perspectives and moods before and after the town hall. So you can actually understand how that messaging is resonating with your population as a whole, but then you can also segment and look at some of the underrepresented groups within the organizations to see how that message is actually landing with them. And it may not be the same. And if it's not, you need to understand that and you need to actually refine that. So I think like in many use cases for technology, it's a great way to support intent, but the intent and the programs have to be the foundation that's then supported by the technology.
Really good. Katie, I see you nodding your head. I would love for you to add on to that and also talk to me about data, because there's this promise that if HR just got a little bit more data centric and data friendly, all the problems would be solved. And it's not like we're discovering new data. It's so frustrating to me. So talk to me about technology and data and the promise of all of that.
Yeah, I was just wanting to sparkle on what you're saying, Lars. So I was like, yes, because I think our data is it's helpful. Technology is tech is incredibly helpful to moving employees through HR systems for understanding metrics, critical metrics to support DEI. But our data is only as useful as our people are. And there are a lot of organizations who rely heavily on things like recruiting rates, but don't actually explore like what is the satisfaction of employees? How satisfied are people through the recruiting process? Are we promoting people? Are we retaining people? What do the promotion rates look like from Black and brown folks versus white folks? These are really critical moments to pay attention to. Also, there's so much nuance that we get in actually talking to our employees that we have to couple that together with the technology. Listening sessions, one-on-one conversations with leaders help us understand the nuance that sometimes we can't get in a survey. So together, they're actually the kind of the winning strategy. You need both.
Well, Katie, it's interesting that you talk about nuance because people are scared of nuance. I mean, that's just a human condition, right? So when you do your work and you look at the data and you look at the wonderful technology platforms that people have, how do you get people to move from information to conversation?
It's tough. I think people are so concerned about getting it wrong. They don't want to approach an employee, say the wrong thing, or do the wrong thing. But I think what is really important to divorce yourself from is perfection. You're gonna probably get it wrong. You may step in it. You may create some weird conversations, but the goal is to repair. The goal is not perfection. The goal is to start having conversations with employees, to understand what they need, to ask people very honestly, what are the barriers you have to success in our organization? And be willing to hear the feedback and the answer to that. So you don't have to get it 100% right. You just got to keep trying with your staff.
Really good. Minda, I would love your thoughts on this because one of the things you bring to the table is this passion for greater and more important conversations. So when you see data and you see systems out there and the two never meet in a healthy way, where do you start?
Yeah, I think that data, it definitely helps inform what's going on in the workplace. And I think we do need the AI technology because, for example, some companies are doing these listening tours or conversations. And yes, what might have been said in May is still important, but maybe things have changed since May, right? So how do we keep up with that? And so asking the right questions is really what I think we need to get down to the bottom of, because if you don't have a diverse team analyzing or setting up the data sets, then you're not going to ask the right questions in terms of how we get to the full employee experience. And so I think data is important, but I also think who is setting the data? Is it a diverse team that's working on the programming, the AI technology, because they're only going to have one viewpoint and ask questions that are maybe from their experience, right? So I think, yes, data can be good, but it's that yes and who are the people building the technology?
Really good. Lars, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the role of AI in all of this, because the promise is that AI is going to make us taller, smarter, more beautiful, right? It's going to solve all of our problems. It's going to bring me coffee in the morning. And AI, by and large, lets me down. So I don't know, what's the promise of AI in the space of DEI?
Yeah, well, the promise of AI is massive. It's going to do everything, like you said. I think the challenge with AI is that when AI began to be introduced a couple of years ago, there was such a big hype bubble around it that everybody latched onto it and made all these promises, right? That it's going to do all these things for you and it's going to revolutionize everything. And maybe it will in time, but we're not there yet. I mean, to me, I think where AI is interesting is its ability to analyze and interpret massive data sets at scale. So when it comes to, we have all of this data, and we're expecting humans to kind of interpret it. And, we have been, that's been part of how HR has worked. But if we have some of these HR tools that will actually allow us to synthesize huge data sets and interpret meaning for them, meaning in them that actually inform our actions as an organization and as an HR team, that to me is where the real value of AI is. And I think we'll probably start to see that on the early side on recruiting. I know in last week's episode, when we spoke to Hung a little bit, we talked about the potential of AI in recruiting. I think, being able to use a tool that will make connections based on data points from somebody's, not just their resume, but, their work experience, a variety of different channels, and then actually help you make connections for talent with jobs that you wouldn't ordinarily connect in a traditional recruiting environment where you're matching, a job description and a resume and a hiring manager who needs all those skills on day one, right? I think it's going to broaden the talent pool. I think that's where we'll probably start to see more of an immediate impact because some of those tools already exist. And then as time goes by and as AI matures and more importantly, our HXM tech stack matures with it, I think we'll start to be able to use it in ways to interpret large data sets to actually make much more data informed and data led decisions around diversity.
That's really great. I want to pick up and go rogue with this next question for all of you, because there's something you said in there, Lars, that was so interesting to me. And Katie, I'll posit this to you. Lars talked about the hype cycle, right? There's always hype cycle around tech, but there's always hype cycles around everything in this world, right? And I'm worried that we are in a hype cycle around diversity and inclusion and equity and belonging. So what is the responsibility of the HR function to make sure that this isn't another Me Too, another Love is Love, right? That kind of fizzles out after 6 months. How do we beat the hype cycle?
Oh, I feel like that is a layered cake question, and I think it's a real one, and it's a real one that we've seen bore out already. That in the first few months right after Brother Floyd's murder, we saw a real push for organizations to declare how important Black lives were to their organization, and we don't see that same volume right now, right? There was this big upswing and then it dies down.
Well, they did it already. Wait, Katie, it's done. They said Black Lives Matter.
Problem.
Yeah,
racism is done, folks.
Totally.
But I do think what is true is your strategy has to be beyond compassion. It has to be about how does this actually make our organization better? How do we actually center Black and brown voices in our organization? And what is at stake for us if we do not get this right? When you actually bake it into your strategy and not just use it as a benevolent exercise for brown and Black folks, like this is what we're doing to be nice to people, but this is actually a lever that will differentiate us, make us stronger, make us more successful, then you don't drop the ball. And I think that that's what we've seen as organizations who are responding to a moment in a compassionate way, but not actually thinking about diversity as part of your strategy, part of your ways to win. And I think that is the differentiator, and that will help you keep the momentum even when the news cycle changes.
Interesting. Minda, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, you and I have talked about the hype cycle in the past. You've got to have some strong feelings about this.
Yeah, I feel similar to Katie. I think that You know, I've heard even CEOs say, you know, we've talked about race enough. Oh, have you? Have you now? You can't solve all of systemic racism's problems in a 60-minute Zoom call. Sorry to disappoint, but I think we have to remember that diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is a daily practice. This isn't something that we do for 90 days and then we move on. It has to be, as Katie mentioned, baked into it. It has to be in the beginning. It has to, actually, we have to dismantle some of the previous systems and go back and say, where wasn't diversity in this business case? And let's make sure we get it in there and make it part of every business case going forward, right? In the marketing team, in the ERG programs, like everything has to be there, because when it's there, embedded in everything we do, in the metrics, then we don't have to, it's almost like the sentence, right? Diversity has to be in the sentence. It can't be the asterisk, right? We can't just pull it out of the box when another murder has taken place. So it has to really be in the beginning. And I think that it's part of everyone holding our leadership accountable, holding HR accountable, to make sure that this is a daily practice in our culture from now and beyond. And the moment that we even question, have we done enough? No, you're doing it wrong, right? There's still so much more to do.
Really well said. Lars, you know, I know you talk to forward-thinking, progressive chief people officers on a regular basis, although forward-thinking chief people officers is still something I have a hard time saying, you know, but you believe they're out there, right? Okay. So you talk to them. Are they really keeping this top of mind, or are they feeling that CEO pressure to ramp back up on productivity and to get their numbers going, or to make sure that they're meeting headcount, right? There are all these other things happening. Are they really still as serious today as they were 6 months ago about diversity and inclusion?
Yeah. I mean, look, I think for progressive CPOs, they realize that all those things can and should coexist, right? It's not this or that. It's not, you know, productivity or diversity. It's not, you know, recruiting or inclusion. I think they have a more holistic way of viewing inclusion and belonging. It's not just something that is kind of, I think, you know, if you go back to kind of legacy-oriented HR, too often we looked at diversity as this thing kind of connected to recruiting, right? It was more of a transactional approach to making sure that our pipeline of talent that we're considering was diverse. And it was so short-sighted. And I think in these more progressive companies, they are looking at it more holistically. And I think, you know, luckily, I think in those companies that have those types of CPOs, oftentimes, not entirely, but they have CEOs and executive teams, you know, who also tend to be a bit more progressive. You know, I worry as well about, you know, the hype cycle, you know, fading. And I think, you know, candidly, the only way that I think we can address that in a sustained way is more people who look like me, paying attention, doing the work, making the commitment, and understanding that the systems that we've built are designed to self-perpetuate. And unless we re-engineer the systems, the outcomes will continue to be the same, no matter, you know, what we change on our avatars or what, you know, checks we write. And so, you know, I think that the role of a CPO is to kind of hold those CEO and those executive peers accountable to those commitments. And it's not easy in some cases, but, you know, from what I've seen, the kind of leaders that I'm talking about are committed to that work.
Good. That's great to hear. Well, you know, I think one of the things we're talking about is accountability. And so, Katie, I wonder if you have some thoughts on that, really the role of technology in all of this to help keep people accountable. So let me back off and let you answer that. Tell me about accountability and how we make that happen.
Yeah, I believe that D&I initiatives are absolutely hollow unless we hold people accountable to those initiatives. And I think that accountability has to also be married with transparency. I think so much of the missteps organizations have made in the past as it relates to diversity is around not garnering trust with those most impacted, which means how can those folks hold you accountable, and how are you reporting out to those folks, both before to solicit their feedback and their ideas, and also after, so that they know where you're making movement, where are we at today. And I think those things together are really important for us to actually make traction, because often we don't include the most impacted folks in the design of D&I initiatives. We don't include them in the report out or to provide feedback. And that's a real misstep our organization needs to our organizations take. And I think creating those accountabilities and transparencies is part of the solve for that.
Great. Minda, I see you shaking your head. Talk to me about accountability and even the role of HXM in all of this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is where, again, HXM is really important because it does help hold us accountable. So it's not, oh, I don't want to tell my friend Jim, who is a manager, that he's doing it wrong, right? But we can actually have a conversation with Jim based off of, the reporting that we're pulling, right? So if one of the statistics out there is that 1 in 25 women of color are advanced into the executive suite, whereas 1 in 5 white women. So let's use that as the backdrop, right? That's the data point. So now you can say, who are their managers? Are they meeting with everybody consistently, or are they only meeting with a certain subset? And I think you can track those things, how you're having one-on-one performance management conversations. And I feel like all of that really will define how diversity is really working in a company. Are these initiatives working for everybody? And I think that, it's not saying, hey, so-and-so's a bad person, but it's saying, actually, we've looked at the reporting, we've looked at the data, and this is what we're seeing. And I think that that really helps, and it holds people accountable to do better.
I love that. That's really great. And, Minda, I'm thinking about accountability also for people who work from home, right? Because it's one thing to hold people accountable in the office when you can see them. You have these serendipitous moments that you can even track in the office. But when people are remote and distributed, it's a little bit different. So talk about this world that we're living in the middle of COVID, right? As we have this emerging second wave, people are still going to continue to work from home. How do we hold people accountable for still living up to the values that we instituted 6 months ago?
Yeah, I think when you have a good system, good technology that you can utilize wherever you're at, right, to be able to do your job, whether you're in a hotel room, you're on the couch, you're in the, you're in your home office. And I think that's part of it, understanding, what are your day-to-day activities? Are those being done? Where the manager too, you don't have to now be in New York at the same time, at the same place. I can actually take a look at the data and see, oh, okay, yeah, Minda's still moving this project forward, right? Or if there is something going on, I can say, this looks a little different. Let's have a conversation about it. Now I know we need to have a one-on-one on Friday, right? As opposed to just breathing down Minda's neck all day, because I think she might be watching Netflix instead of doing her job, but she might be actually be doing her job, right? So I think it really does just make us all better. Again, going back to the human experience, I think with good HXM products, or technology, you can make sure that everybody's experience, even if they're experiencing it differently, we can follow that, we can track it. I think that's important.
Really great. Lars, you've written a lot about COVID-19 and the impact on the workforce. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about this. Like, how do we hold people accountable when, as Minda said, we think they're kind of watching Netflix all day? I mean, first of all, maybe we should stop thinking that, but you tell me.
Yeah, I mean, I think for one, hopefully our companies are in a place where we can assume good intent. We can assume that we've hired adults. We can assume that we've hired people that are, engaged and committed as best they can be given the circumstances. What you don't want to do from an HXM standpoint is buy software that takes a random photo or screenshot through somebody's webcam every certain amount of time to make sure somebody's at your desk. If you have that, please remove it. It's terrible. Horrible. I think it's one of the worst pieces of technology you can have in an environment like this. So, but there are ways you can check in. We've got Slack, we've got all these different communication channels, whatever we use to be able to, get a read on the pulse of where our employees are. But I think also just for managers, we have to work a little bit harder on being more proactive about, communication and support and understanding and really gauging like how our employees are doing and understanding that, especially, given all of the, COVID and unrest and political climate, all these things that are swirling around us, every one of your employees are going to be experiencing this differently. And so you can't have a one size fits all approach with how you manage them. You have to really empathize with their own point of view. And again, I think communication tools in particular are really valuable to help you just make sure you're able to check in, see how people are doing, and support them.
Well, really good stuff, everybody. And as we wrap up the conversation today, I really want to put this discussion around diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging in perspective. Like, we took this broad brush, right? And we painted this topic really widely with technology. But Katie, if there's one thing that you want people to know in this time and in this moment about this issue, what is it? Where should their head be? What are you thinking?
It's a little to Laris's point just now that we are all in the same storm, but we're in very different boats. And we are going through this experience where each of us are kind of been sent to our rooms, we're all home. And what a perfect time for us to do some of the deep work we have to do as individuals around our own identity and how we show up as humans and employees. And what a beautiful time for employers to get clear about how important it is to create equitable spaces for their employees. And we have no better time than now. We see the costs of not doing this work and the impacts it has on all people, not just brown and black folk, but every person, regardless of their identity. When we don't do this work, when we don't put our focus on D&I initiatives, that harms us all. And so this is a really important time for us to kind of buckle down, get true to our values, really get clear about who we are and get to work.
Great, really well said. Minda, what would you like to add?
Yeah, I think Katie hit it. The only thing I can add to that is just let's allow yourself to investigate how HXM can be helpful to your company or organization, because I think it's time we start humanizing the workplace.
Really good stuff. Lars, take us home. What do you got?
Yeah, I mean, look, I would reinforce what both Katie and Minda said. The only thing that I could add, which is really kind of echoing, I think, Katie's point, is like, be willing to do the work in this time. Be willing to read, to understand, to broaden your scope. The things that historically, I think a lot of people maybe thought didn't impact them actually do impact you. And so you have to actually, this is a pretty pivotal moment in time, particularly for those of you watching in the US, to be thinking about this and to be principled and to take a stand. And so I hope that people really take the time to kind of educate themselves and then, stand up for what's right.
Really great. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Thank you, Katie Augsburger. Thank you, Minda Hartz. And thank you, Lars Schmidt. A lot of these conversations that we've been having over this series are also being had at an event called Success Connect. And no matter when you're watching this, at any point, Success Connect is going to be putting out videos, conversations around that conference. So you can find links and more information down below. And on behalf of everybody today, I want to say thank you. And thank you for watching The Rise of HXM Human Experience Management. We'll see you next week. Bye, everybody.
Take care.
Bye.